Yeah, we're gonna be reading this wrestling research review. We're gonna be describing and explaining what the document entails in the 75 page fucking editorial document on the needs of wrestling. So basically it's training to plan training activities that develop these factors along with training the appropriate energy systems. Some important components for wrestling are okay, so this would contribute towards the success in wrestling career. Technique, aerobic capacity, CV endurance, anaerobic capacity, high intensity actions, strength, both static and dynamic, strength endurance, explosive power, power endurance, techniques, uh, tactics and strategy, technique, flexibility, speed and quickness, balance, and kinesthetic awareness. Components of the training program are the variables that the coach can manipulate. And planning workouts, these are frequency, the number per workouts per week, intensity, the difficulty or pace of the training, and duration, the length of time of the training activity. Volume is a function of frequency, and duration and gives the overall amount of training. Interval training is a technique used by coaches to vary these components in individual workouts, and as the season goes on, this can mean lengthening the length of live wrestling, decreasing the rest interval, increasing the intensity of the wrestling. This can be accomplished through using more challenging partners, rotating rested wrestlers on the target wrestler, wrestling when pre-fatigued, and establishing the number of attacks that must be initiated in a particular time. To name a few methods, principle of hard/easy and variability. Many athletes train hard every time they work out. Many coaches follow this regimen. Sport scientists are finding that continual hard training with little variation from high intensity and high volumes can lead to less than optimal adaptation or worse yet, a decrease in performance. So this can also extend the success and popularity of cross training used to break up the routine. Principle of periodization is defined as a gradual of cycling of components in the training program as such to achieve the top levels of said finished program or performance at the right time of the year. The term peaking is used to describe the situation. It makes no sense to be in this peak state for early seasons and jewel meet and to be worn out by the time important tournaments come towards the end of the season. Application of periodization requires planning in advance. Some coaches of elite athletes begin their planning around the 4 year Olympic quadrennium. More frequently, one begins with an annual cycle. In periodization terminology, this is referred to as a macrocycle. This macrocycle is further divided into three mesocycles, which represents the most important competitions. Because of a shorter season, a plan for a high school team might just have one mesocycle battle around the end of the state season tournament series. It could also add an additional mesocycle that builds towards important summer competitions. The guiding principle is to begin with a high volume of more general activities and gradually move towards a decrease in volume and an increase in intensity with more specific drills and exercises. Each mesocycle is broken down into periods of preparation, competition, and transition. In the preparation phase, practices consist of a higher number of repetitions in drilling and exercises. There may be technique and work performed at slower speed. Aerobic work may take the form of distance runs. The volume is gradually built up to high levels. It is important to note that there may be competition during this time, but it is not most of the important target of the training. As the competition phase is begun, the intensity is elevated. There may be less work on presenting new drilling is a new technique. Drilling is faster. There's more live wrestling. Sprints replace distant runs. There may be reductions in rest intervals, and fresh partners are rotated on to one wrestler. All of these methods increase the intensity. What if the Practice and training continue with both high volume and high intensity. A decrease in performance is a likely result. The phenomena is called overtraining. This phenomena, an older term that is used to describe this condition of staleness. How can overtraining be avoided? Coaches must plan for allowing the wrestlers to recover. One technique is to apply the principle of hard/easy within the weekly cycle. There can be a variation of intensity and volume so that hard workouts are followed by an easier day, allowing for recovery from the breakdown that accompanies high intensity training and subsequent adaptation. Another concept in this training is that of tapering. This is the part of the process discussed earlier where volume is reduced and intensity is increased, but it is employed a bit closer to the actual important competitions. During the taper, practices can still be intense, but they are shorter. The morning workout might not be held. Recovery therapies may always important are now emphasized. These may include ice massages, relaxation activities, more post-practice stretching, increased sleep, and optimal nutrition and hydration schedules. The need for wrestlers to make weight makes them more dramatic. Pre-competition resting, seen in some runners and swimmers, more difficult to employ. The transitional phase follows the competition and is in an annual cycle where there's only one peak or mesocycle might be called the off season. In plan where there is to be another mesocycle or a peak, this period is highlighted by less intense training, a higher general volume of training, and active rest. Active rest can include playing other sports like lifting and rehabilitation from any nagging injuries. And an important note when discussing the cycle of intensities and the volume of training load in a periodized scheme is that even though one may plan uh their plan might call for an easier period following one of high intensity training does not return to the level of the previous cycle. It is more of a staircase model where the training load builds on the previous level of adaptation and goes to a higher level. The final training principle, which makes us come back to the realization, which is coaching, it's as much as an art as a science, is a principle of individuality because of our genetic makeups. Not every person responds to training in exactly the same way. The adaptation response to a particular training regimen will not always be the same. Scientists have identified the concept of responders and non-responders in an athlete's adaptation to particular training programs. Ultimately, coaches must take into account the specific needs and abilities of their wrestlers as they plan their training programs. So let's dissect that. Basically, this is like telling us like all the methods and like what we're supposed to exactly do. Like in our training, and these are explaining the basic concepts and principles of training, like what we're supposed to apply throughout and to develop appropriate cardio and like success in wrestling is that we need like about at least 10 or 11 different main components and we need them in like around the 4-year Olympic quadrennium as like this is usually referred to as a macro cycle if you're going to use it like in an annual yearly training routine, and it's divided into three or one mesocycles, which is usually for high school and college tournaments like well, this is for like really important season state tournament series or like important summer competitions or Pan Am games and stuff like that is within the mesocycle, and those are usually towards the end. And the macro cycle is like world championships, and then like the Olympic quadrennium. You already know that's like the highest level of wrestling you could get is an Olympic gold medal and freestyle. But basically, that's like how I'd explain this, and they're saying like how shouldn't always train at your full like maximum strength every time with the highest intensity, trying to mimic the best results because that will likely cause a performance decrease instead of an increase. And you should use other concepts like the principle of hard and easy, like to have rest days, but there's still like days where you can rehabilitate and work out. And there's another method which tapering the volume. You're not supposed to do as much, but you like the things that you are doing and the wrestlers that you're taking on and the workouts are going to be more intense and shorter. And so yeah, like and the recovery therapies are also emphasized in that tapering period, especially. That's what this explains. And the transitional phase follows the competition. It's basically where it's like less training, but it's for the off season. This training and like it's based off of the staircase model. The training loads build into the higher levels of adaptation, and it keeps on and going further beyond. And like every one person is different in their own genetic makeups, so like people don't respond to training in exactly the same way. That's what they describe here as the principle of individuality. Like frequency, intensity, duration, volume, interval training, um stuff like that. That's like the main points that you're trying to take away. It's like how you're trying to increase your nutrition, and this is what I describe. And then we're gonna explain the doping within the rest lean. Well, basically, the drug revelations of the past year has shocked the entire sports world. The use of the previously undetectable steroid THC has been widespread from baseball to football to track and field. Allegations are rampant, and drug testers have handed out numerous suspensions. Drug testing agencies seem to be making some gains in cleaning up sport. Here's some information concerning drug testing and drug use in sport and wrestling in particular. In international sport, the term doping is used to describe the illegal use of substances that are illegal to enhance your performance or processed and used to enhance the performance. So it has like a long history. Straight chicken, caffeine, cocaine, and alcohol were used by endurance athletes, especially cyclists in the 19th century, in the late 19th century, actually. Restrictions were adopted because of the by the track and field federations, but because there was no testing, they were ineffective. The type of stimulants used to expanded to include the amphetamines, and after the death of a cyclist in the 1960 Rome Olympics, whose autopsy revealed amphetamines, there were increased calls for testing. During the 1960s and 50s, there were also growing use of synthetic hormone anabolic steroids. The abuse was seen mostly in readily in strength and power sports. The first testing in the Summer Olympics was done in Mexico City in 1968 and mainly included stimulants. Testing for anabolic steroids began in 1976. Early testing was only done at the competition, doping scandals, and cycling. The exposure to the East German systematic doping program, along with the unified need to develop a consistent approach to doping in all sport, led to the establishment of an independent international organization, the WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency. WADA took over the testing of the athletes at the Sydney Olympics. It is important that they are in a better position to conduct all the important out of competition testing of athletes. Without unannounced testing during training, athletes could easily avoid detection by discontinuing the use of the drug in enough time for the body to clear of the substances, and yet still have the desired effects for competition. These organization is in a more powerful position to avoid the legal entanglements that put the decision of sport federations into civil courts and often made the program ineffective. Sheila, the history of testing in international wrestling is contained in the chart one, except for the use of painkillers like xylocaine and furosemide. All illegal substances were anabolic steroids. Spermicide and furosemide is a diuretic that can help mask the use of steroids. Three golds and one silver medal have been lost because of drug use. It is worth noting that in the first Olympics with women wrestling, a wrestler tested positive. Obviously, these are the athletes who are caught before out of competition testing. There are several countries where the use of steroids are suspected. USA and USADA Wrestling, the agency responsible for testing in the USA is the United States Anti-Doping Agency since 2000. And USADA has been responsible for managing both in and out of competition testing for athletes in U.S. Olympic sports, including Olympic, Pan American, and Paralympic athletes. Wrestlers are tested at the senior nationals and World Olympic trials. Out of a competition, testing is performed on wrestlers from a list provided by USA Wrestling. This is generally the national or top three rated wrestlers. Some of our top wrestlers have been tested 5 times per year. There have been very few positive USA wrestlers. Since USADA took over the testing, there has been one positive for steroids at a competition and one for stimulants in competition. There was also one positive for steroids by an American wrestler in the 1995 World Cup. Drug use by American wrestlers does not seem too much of a problem. The biggest problems are at the administrative end. Mitch Hall, such directional director of national teams for USA Wrestling, says that his biggest test is not positive. A test on a drug test. That's not his biggest worry, but rather the quarterly filing of the athlete location forms for out of competition testing. Failure to file counts as a mistest. Three miscounts. Three missed test counts as a positive test. The testing of the NCAA athletes is done by the National Center for Drug Free Sport. It grew out of the NCAA's Department of Sport Science. The NCAA's first testing was done with football bowl games in 1986 and 1990. It was expanded to year-round testing of football players and the NCAA tests at selected championships and year-round random testing of all athletes. In D1 and D2, all 13,000 athletes were tested in the last school year. Not all championship events have been testing. There's a rotation that is random, not announced in advance. In 2003, testing took place at the Nationals in wrestling for Division 1, 2, and 3. I have 88 testers, one positive test. Consider Division 3 wrestler tested for positive for the banned stimulant ephedrine. Ephedrine. Then, okay. Testing at the high school level is almost non-existent. Yeah, there are only a handful of schools with chess athletes. Most of these athletes focus on recreational drug use and not performance enhancers such as steroids. Steroid testing is much more expensive. Therapeutic exemption. Orphan athletes need a drug that is banned on the list. Is that asthma medication, for example? In some cases, doctors can prescribe another drug that is not banned if this is not possible. An exemption form is filed with the governing agency, and then yeah, they have all that shit. Look, they're detecting the steroids within his lab. The director of the Olympic Analytical Laboratory supplements. Each wrestler is responsible for what goes into their body. The use of nutritional and dietary supplements poses some risk. There are many products available in health foods or stores. Are vitamin stores, which will cause a positive test. This is an additional problem that many of these brands and products may contain very small amounts of advanced substances not listed on the label. Be careful. Talk to your trainer, dietitian, or team doctor. Both Wasada and Nevada are funding research in order to stay ahead of drug cheats and test for drugs currently abused, along with others on the horizon, needs to be developed. For instance, there is good news. There is now a test available for HGH. It's more difficult to detect the use of drugs that occur naturally in the body. 10% of over 3,000 drug tests performed in Athens included testing for HGH. There were no positives. Train hard, stay healthy, compete clean, have a great career. And then they have like everything listed down here for like the countries that they represent, the drugs, the loss of their medals, their weight classes right here, and just everything else. So this is just explaining the steroid use, how it's so prevalent and stuff. I think we've concluded that a lot in wrestling. It's a very complicated sport, and I want to continue learning about it.